What would you do if you found yourself trapped in a bizarre warehouse, surrounded by shadows and threatening whispers? The only certainty is that nothing is what it seems. Get ready for an adventure with no way back. Alright, settle in because here comes the story. My name is Jake, and I work at one of the big warehouses of Amazon. I work hard. Everyone knows this job is no walk in the park. We get those crazy targets to hit all the time, and to tell the truth, the environment is kind of heavy. Like, you're always thinking, what if I can't get everything done? The pressure is intense. That week, things started to get strange. First, it wasn't just me noticing. Some co-workers mentioned that some products were simply disappearing. It wasn't just a pen or a box of stuff. It was expensive items, like phones or electronics. The boss didn't want to hear that talk, and we could only stay quiet and keep working. But the feeling that something was wrong kept growing. The fluorescent lights in the warehouse flickered constantly, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, it felt like the place was breathing, you know? One time, I was organizing boxes in a darker area and heard some whispers. It was like someone was talking, but I couldn't understand. I looked around, and everyone seemed absorbed in their own tasks, heads down, not paying attention. That gave me a chill. What bothered me even more, some co-workers started acting weird. During break, I overheard one of them, Carlos, whispering with someone about night deliveries. He looked at me, and when I tried to strike up a conversation, he avoided my gaze, as if he was scared. That's not normal, man. This kind of vibe was unfamiliar to me. One day, after a tiring shift, I went outside to get some fresh air. The air felt heavy, and the sky was dark with clouds. While I was about to leave, I realized almost nobody was in the yard. Suddenly, an echo of laughter came from inside the warehouse. But it wasn't a regular laugh. It was a strange, frantic laugh. I rubbed the back of my neck, feeling an insane urge to go back and get out of there. What was happening? Man, I'd never felt this kind of fear just because the shift ended. I looked back and saw shadows dancing in the windows of the warehouse. Seriously, things weren't just strange. They were simply wrong. The feeling that it was beyond my control intensified every day. And that was just the first week. Little did I know that things would get worse and that heavy atmosphere would never let me be in peace. Something was about to happen, and man, I just wish I had listened to my instincts. After all, who would have imagined that working there could be the beginning of a nightmare? So, the next day, my supervisor called me in. He looked at me with that you can't refuse look and told me to make a delivery. But it wasn't just any delivery. No, it was a package to a remote area of the city. And guess what? It was in the middle of the night. As soon as he said that, a chill ran through me. I kept remembering everything that happened in the past few days and thought, this can't be a good idea. But there was no escaping it, right? Amazon doesn't usually take no for an answer. And if I refused, I'd have to deal with the boss's frustration and maybe a ton of bigger problems. I grabbed the van keys and started gearing up. It was dark outside, and that alone made the situation feel heavier. Before leaving, I took a map of the area, and the place I had to go seemed really isolated. Those narrow and lit streets gave me some serious anxiety. On the way, I changed the music several times. I kept listening until I realized that nothing was going normally. The radio started to crackle, and I swear that, at some point, it seemed like I heard voices. I looked back, but there was nobody there. I began to think my mind was breaking. And to make things worse, the van lights started to flicker, as if they were trying to say I shouldn't go. When I arrived near the address, the atmosphere got strange again. The street had a few houses, but they were all empty, with broken windows. And the place I had to go was an abandoned building at the end of the street. A shiver ran down my spine. I don't know why, but each step I took made me more anxious. There was such a heavy silence that I could hear my own heartbeat. I parked the van and grabbed the package. At that moment, a cat appeared out of nowhere and crossed the street. I froze. I could hear it meowing, and that sounded like an alert that sent chills down my spine. But work was work, and I had to deliver. I walked up to the door, which was slightly ajar, and pushed it open. The wood creaked as if it were warning me that it was best not to enter. Inside, everything was dark. Some lights flickered, and the smell was musty mixed with something I couldn't identify. I tried to turn on my phone's flashlight to see better. When I illuminated the room, I saw it was full of boxes, but the boxes were different from the ones I usually saw at work. They looked old, as if they had been there for years. I started approaching, and suddenly, in those shadows, I heard that whisper again, whispering my name. The only thing I could do was take a step back, but the floor made a noise and something fell behind me. I looked back, and I can't explain the feeling. It was as if someone were in the room, but there was nobody. My heart almost stopped. The instinct screamed from me to get out of there, and I didn't need a second order. I turned and ran out without thinking twice, but the exit felt longer, and the shadows seemed to want to trap me there. I reached the door, but when I opened it, I came face to face with something, a presence that made me tremble from head to toe. And, man, there was no way I could ignore that it was time to run, and fast. So, I bolted through the door and didn't look back. My body was in survival mode, with adrenaline pumping. I sprinted toward the van, and I swear, the feeling that something was right behind me was unbearable. When I finally reached the van, I could see the vehicle, but the keys weren't where they should be. Where are the keys? There's no way this is happening. I searched everywhere, fumbling through my pockets, but nothing. The only thing I felt was the weight of some eyes on me, as if someone was there, waiting for me to be distracted. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I looked back and saw a shadow moving, and that sent me into a total panic. I decided I had no time to lose. I took off running toward the exit, but as I turned, the same shadow I had seen was at the corner of the building, as if it were waiting for me. The chill in my stomach returned with force, and I was just thinking about how to get that image out of my head. Instead of chasing after the van, I decided to head back to the street, even knowing the risk of staying there was high. When I finally reached the street, it felt like the atmosphere changed again. The sky was darker than before, and the air had a heavy feeling that I wasn't alone. I kept running, but something wouldn't let my mind rest. What was that place? What was inside that building? I needed answers, but at the same time, I was afraid of what I might discover. I sped down the street, and for a moment, I thought maybe I had left everything behind. Important to remember, I just wanted to get home and forget about that night. I decided to call my buddy, Carlos, because he always had a way of looking at things. The phone rang, but nobody answered. The feeling of despair only grew, and I realized that everything I had heard about work was true. I kept going, but the streets seemed endless. I didn't know where I had gotten lost, coast or inland. The idea of wandering alone in a place like that at night started giving me chills. Just when I was about to give up, I saw a light in the distance. I thought, finally, a sign of civilization. But the closer I got, the more I realized that the light was coming from another warehouse, very similar to the one I had fled in terror. What was I going to do? Ignore it, go in and face whatever it was. With that doubt in my mind, I decided to approach. The door was slightly ajar, and there was no way. I just had to go in. And believe me, as soon as I stepped inside, I was greeted by a long, dark corridor. The dim light reflected off the walls, and the tension returned, like I was crossing sacred ground. The whispers began to echo down that corridor, the same ones that had haunted me before. They seemed louder now, like a chorus of voices coming together to tell me something. "Jake, you shouldn't be here." I looked back and realized I could no longer go back. The door I had entered slammed shut behind me, trapping me in that place. What was inside that warehouse? What did those voices want? The only certainty I had was that things were about to get much worse. So there I was, in the middle of that creepy warehouse, not knowing what to do. The voices seemed to be getting closer, and I simply couldn't stay still. I looked one way and then the other, trying to find an exit. But the corridor seemed to stretch infinitely, and the light was starting to flicker, as if it were warning me to get out of there. I decided to move, carefully walking, trying to make as little noise as possible. The chill in my gut kept increasing, and to make matters worse, the feeling that something was following me became more real. Each time I looked over my shoulder, I thought I would see something bizarre, but in the end, it was just my mind losing it. I passed by a room that was slightly open. I peeked in, and man, what a sight. There was a table full of documents and several photos spread out. I moved closer, and when I saw, it was all about the deliveries and the products that were disappearing. There were photos of every item that vanished, and my heart raced when I recognized some of the objects, stuff I had put on the shelf days ago. At this point, all I wanted was to know what was happening. I tried to grab a picture, but as soon as I touched the table, a loud noise echoed from the back of the warehouse, as if someone had knocked something over. At that moment, instinct kicked in. I had to get out of there. I ran out of the room and headed toward the noise. You know when curiosity is stronger than fear? Well, that's what happened. I entered another room, and wow, this one was even worse. The lights were flickering wildly, and I saw several people inside, their faces covered, all gathered around a table, as if they were performing some kind of ritual. Everyone was silent, but those whispers I had heard before were louder. I looked closely and saw a large box in the center of the table, and guess what? It gave off a strange feeling. One of the guys, who was standing up, looked at me. His gaze was so intense that all I felt like doing was running, but I couldn't move. My mind screamed, "Run, Dick, run." Then, the guy raised his hand and started saying something I couldn't understand. It sounded like a mantra or an invocation, and a few seconds later, the atmosphere began to change. The flickering light stopped, and a kind of shadow started to form in the corner of the room. My body froze, and I could only watch as the thing grew and took shape. It was as if the whole place was being swallowed by it. The tension was palpable. Where had I gotten myself into? The only thing I knew was that the exit was far away, and I still had no idea how to get out of there unnoticed. I barely breathed, waiting for that crazy scene to not be my last. Then, the guy at the table looked directly at me, and before I could act, he extended his hand as if he were beckoning me. Was this it? Should I go to him? My instinct told me to run, but curiosity and adrenaline were high. Lack of options in the end. With a hesitant step, I moved closer, and each step felt like it took an eternity. When I got near the table, the atmosphere was so heavy it felt like I could touch the tension. The shadow was now clear, and before I could react, one of the masked guys at the table turned to me and, in a deep voice, said, "You finally arrived. What are you willing to lose?" The question echoed in my head, and at that moment, I realized that everything I had believed was about to be turned upside down. I was there, standing, with my heart racing, the question echoing in my mind. What are you willing to lose? I was taken aback, thinking about the mistake I had made by ending up in that creepy warehouse. The tension was so thick I felt like I could cut it with a knife. The guy who spoke seemed to be waiting for my answer. I looked round and saw the people with masks, the shadows dancing round, and the biggest shadow in the corner, as if it were waiting for something. I tried to think about what was happening, but everything seemed confusing. What did they want from me? I recalled the delivery. It was just a package, right? How had this turned into a horror movie situation? Finally, I managed to articulate something. I just want to go home. My voice came out more shaky than I expected, but the guy just smiled a sinister smile, as if he had heard the same answer from many others. Going home, he repeated, and the atmosphere seemed to change. The shadow behind him began to writhe, as if it were enjoying the situation. You need to understand that the choice isn't yours. You are here for a reason. Damn, and now, what had I done to end up in the middle of that confusion? I tried to bring up the subject of the delivery, the job, everything that felt normal before. But everything was completely out of control. I don't understand what's happening. What is this? What do you want from me? The guys at the table seemed more focused now, and the one who had been speaking turned to them and said something I couldn't hear. The atmosphere was so heavy that the urge to run came back to me. But there was something that kept me there, like a buzz in my mind telling me to find out what was really going on. Then one of the guys without a mask approached. He had a serious expression, and I could feel that if he was about to speak, it wouldn't be good. You need to choose, Dick, between what you value and what you're willing to sacrifice. Sacrifice, I asked, not believing what I was hearing. What are you talking about? The whispers started again, and I panicked. Please, I just want to leave. I was ready to throw myself against the door and run, but a part of me wanted to understand where I had ended up. The choice isn't simple, the guy said, and his voice seemed to echo everywhere. You can leave now and forget everything, but that comes at a cost. Or you can stay and be a part of what's happening here. You won't understand everything at once, but you can make a difference. Seriously, the situation was getting insane. I just wanted to understand, but I couldn't connect the dots. Then the shadow began to move faster, and a chill raced down my spine. I looked again at the exit. The door was right there, but something made me hesitate. What if staying here means I'll never leave? I asked, trying to think out loud. The masked guy smiled again, as if he had been expecting that question. All choices have consequences. Choosing to do nothing is also a choice, Jake. The phrase kept hammering in my head, and at that moment, I realized that the decision had to be mine. I just didn't know what the next step would be without knowing what was at stake. And so, I really had to decide. Something inside me urged me to be a part of that madness, but another part warned me that it was all a trap. What would I do? And there you go. Could you make the right choice? Comment below what you would do in that situation. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next chapters of this intriguing story.